Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Adria Vassal, and I'm the managing editor here at Corporate Knights magazine. Welcome to our second annual Sustainable Cities Index, which we launched this morning in our brand new spring issue of Corporate Knights magazine. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Corporate Knights is on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. And you know what? We are based in the Dish with One Spoon territory, and the Dish with One Spoon Treaty is between those nations and it bound them to share this territory and to protect the land. Now, today, more cities around the world are beginning to awaken to that philosophy as they grapple with how to become more sustainable. Now, in today's event, we are going to explore the results of our index and discuss how city leaders are doing just that, tackling sustainability to make their cities more climate resilient, low carbon, and circular. The index would not be possible without the support of WSP. WSP's Director of Sustainability, David Simons, joins us today from London, England. You'll also be hearing from Nadia Morrison. She is our star research analyst at Corporate Knights behind the cities index, as well as Alderman Eddie Andrews, the Deputy Mayor of Cape Town, South Africa, and Tyrone Ju, San Francisco's Director of the Department of the Environment. Now I'm going to hand it over to Nadia, who is going to give us a presentation on our index results.
Thank you so much, Adria. And thank you all for joining us today. I am delighted to share with you the results of the 2023 Sustainable Cities Index. Firstly, I would like to inform you of three major updates to the methodology from last year's inaugural index. First, we have added 20 new cities to the index, rounding out to about 10 cities by region. Many of these new cities emerged as top scoring cities in their region, more on that to come. And to account for differences in social and economic impacts on environmental KPIs, we designed and incorporated the Corporate Knights Socio-Economic Adjustment Factor this year to the index. And lastly, we recognize that sustainability challenges can be influenced by region, and we have introduced a comparative analysis of cities by region. These are the 70 cities in the second annual Sustainable Cities Index. These cities include some of the most populous cities in many mid-sized cities with established reputations for sustainability leadership from the 7 regions as colored here on this map. Each of these 70 cities were evaluated on the same set of indicators. The Sustainable Cities Index was designed to be accessible, robust, and streamlined. We use the same 12 indicators to assess sustainability performance of global cities. The index weights are shown here in this pie chart. Of the 12 indicators, 11 are quantitative measures of environmental sustainability, and our 12th indicator is a measure of sustainability policies enacted by each city. So as mentioned, this year, the research team developed the Corporate Knights Socio-Economic Adjustment Factor in consultation with industry experts. In the scoring methodology, the Corporate Knights Socio-Economic Adjustment Factor acts as an adjustment of environmental indicators to the extent to which they coincide with unsustainable social and economic conditions. For example, indicators of greenhouse gas emissions per capita will be low in middle income countries and cities, perhaps based on poverty or low access to fuel and electricity. The Corporate Knights Socio-Economic Adjustment Factor is based on the equally weighted product of 3 separate indices: the Gini Index, which is a measure of income distribution; the Human Development Index, which is a measure of long, healthy life, being knowledgeable and having a decent standard of living; and lastly, GDP per capita, which is converted to international dollars using PPP rates. For the general scoring scheme, we begin with data for each indicator, which was collected by the Corporate Knights research team from credible and publicly available databases like CDP Cities, the UN Habitat Urban Indicators Database, the World Bank, and many more. Each city was given the opportunity to verify, amend, or adjust any of the collected data. And following a percentile rank was applied to each indicator using our cities database based on best practices for each indicator to generate a score from 0 to 1. The scores were then adjusted by multiplying by the relevant Corporate Knights Socioeconomic Adjustment Factor values, as previously shown. And lastly, then the scores, each ranks were generated by the overall scoring of each indicator, individually weighted as previously shown. And then lastly, we have letter grades that were assigned for easy performance comparison between indicators and cities. To begin with this year's index results, here I present a figure of cities and their index performance and population. So on the y-axis here, I don't know if everyone can see my pointer. I'm just going to make it a red laser. I hope everyone can see it now. So on the y-axis here, we have the ranking order from highest rank to lowest rank. And on the x-axis, we have population in millions. The dots are also colored based on the city's income status in the countries of which they're located, where we have green in high income countries and purple in middle income countries. So as you can see, index rank is highly correlated to city population, where we have high-ranking cities generally tending to have smaller populations and lower-ranking cities tending to have higher populations. In addition, you can see that higher-ranking cities tend to be located in high-income countries. And it's really important to mention that a significant proportion of the global population is located in middle and low-income countries, which are often more vulnerable and less prepared for climate change disasters. Okay, and next up, we have the top 10 ranking cities on the index. Despite adding 20 new cities to the index from around the world, the top 5 cities from last year's index persisted as this year's top 5 as well: Stockholm, Oslo, Copenhagen, Lahti, and London in that order. Of the top 10 cities, 60% are located in Europe and 20% each in Asia Pacific and Canada. 2 new cities to this year's index universe made it to the top 10. That's Auckland in New Zealand and Winnipeg in Canada. The City of London in the United Kingdom has a population of nearly 9 million and can achieve top 5 rank on the index compared to a universe of 70 global cities. Tokyo, another mega city, with a population of over 14 million, ranked 12th. So even though the trend that we saw on the previous slide shows that typically we have a correlation between low population and high sustainability performance, we see that London and Tokyo can illustrate that megacities can be sustainable as well. So comparing the city results by region, we see that there are 4 new cities that are snatching up the top ranking spot in their region. So as mentioned, we have Auckland, which scored the top spot in Asia Pacific, Winnipeg, which is an unexpected leader among Canadian cities, Taipei in Taiwan, which was a new top city as well. And then we have Arequipa in Peru, which scored top rank among Central and South American cities. Returning to their top rank by region are Stockholm, San Francisco, and Cape Town. So we're delighted to have some of our panelists here today representing those cities. And one of the unique features of the Sustainable Cities Index is the inclusion of a consumption-based emissions indicator, which is designed and calculated in-house at Corporate Knights. So I just wanted to take some time to go through this indicator and how it differs from traditional sector-based inventories. Traditional sector-based inventories are accounting for emissions that are a result of the direct production or consumption within a city's boundaries. However, in consumption-based inventories, all emissions that are consumed within the city, regardless of the location of production, are counted. So using the City of Toronto, for which I am dialed in from right now, I will use as an example to walk through how we calculated the consumption-based emissions indicator. The first thing we did was calculate the sum of emissions of greenhouse gas emissions from the city's residential fuel and electricity use, personal transportation fuel, and residential waste. Then we calculated the sum of emissions that are embedded in goods and services that are consumed within the City of Toronto and produced by the domestic economy, including the city's contribution to the domestic economy. And then lastly, we counted the sum of emissions that are embedded in goods and services that are consumed within the city, but imported from other countries. So the example here being the United States, but there are many sources in actuality from where emissions can be imported and consumed within a city's boundaries. When we look at the average breakdown of the greenhouse gas emissions for each of these 3 types, what we see is that most cities are strongly dependent on their interland economies, with an average of 57% of the consumption-based footprint deriving from this source. And it's really interesting to note that this year's analysis of consumption-based emissions focused on 2020 greenhouse gas emissions inventories, which of course were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so as a result of a decrease in trade activity and differences in consumption behaviors and patterns, what we actually saw was a decrease in 3% of the consumption-based emissions that are derived from the imported goods and services. And we saw a proportional balancing from the domestic economy and as well the city's direct use of emissions. And so measuring consumption-based emissions are more accurately capturing the emissions that are actually generated by city activity compared to the sector-based inventory. So it would be very beneficial for cities to set targets for consumption-based emissions reductions in addition to sector-based. And we do see a growing trend in this as well. So through the index work that we do, we're able to collect a globally representative sample of city sustainability data, which has really enabled us to identify urban sustainability performance targets. And these targets are determined with reference to the best performing cities that we have in our index universe, and as well based on the literature and consistency with a sustainable economy. The targets will be recalibrated annually and based on improved performance of the cities that we analyze and any developments in the literature. But I would just like to make specific reference to the two zero emission targets that we have for two emission-based indicators. And again, this is just reflecting our need to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions to avoid the development of climate change impacts. So last but certainly not least, I would really like to extend a sincere thank you to our collaborators in the development of this year's index. That includes Professor Daniel Hornweg of Ontario Technical University, Daniel Socha, Tara Early, and Anne-Marie Godet of WSP, and municipalities in the Greater Toronto Area that provided us with very helpful feedback on the index and process from a city representative's perspective. And as with all of our indices at Corporate Knights, we welcome feedback on all aspects. So if you have any comments, suggestions, or feedback, please email us at cities@corporateknights.com. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Nadia. Really interesting data. Lots to unpack there. Right now, we're going to hand it over to David from WSP, who will speak to whether a world of A+ cities is actually possible. What do you think, David?
Oh, well, thank you. And yes, of course it is. What I want to do is, as well as just offering my congratulations to those cities across the world that have scored well on this index, and congratulations to Corporate Knights for your leadership on producing this as well. I wanted to share just three quick thoughts in terms of how cities can get to an A+. Maybe not necessarily next year, but as part of cities' long-term planning. And the three things I'll just expand on is, first of all, you get to A+ by planning for the future, not just for today. Secondly, you get to A+ by a real focus on transport. And thirdly, you get to A+ by being clear about not just what you want to do, but how you are going to do it, and especially how to fund it. I could probably put another 5 or 6 things on, but those are my top 3. And I just want to unpack that a little bit and take each of those in turn. So first of all, cities will get to an A+ by recognizing that the future of our cities is not the same as today. So if we just look at those, some of those cities that have scored high, let's just think about, first of all, the needs of residents is going to be different for the future. As part of our Future Ready research in WSP, we've been thinking a lot about what are the future needs of residents and the growing needs of people with neurodiversity, for example. It's a really big trend. It's virtually unthought about in many cities planning at the moment. If we look at climate, I had the pleasure of being in Auckland 2 months ago. Just the sheer impact of the 2 cyclones that they have had this summer in Auckland. Climate change is only going to get more significant. That will have an enormous impact on the livability of our cities to the future as well. The same from a new mobility perspective. We're seeing an incredible array of new mobility opportunities coming for residents as well. These are going to matter to the future in terms of how livable and how sustainable our cities are. So my golden rule 1, I would say, is that as well as celebrating success today, it's also important for every city to be thinking about what will change into the future, and how do we make sure that our cities have clear plans in place to make sure that they either rise the ranking or stay where they are based on what we see that future is likely to be. My second point is you get to A+ by a real focus on transport. And the reason I've particularly singled out transport here is very often that is something that city authorities have a big play in terms of planning transport, both in terms of access to transport, in terms of where investment goes, and of course in running public transport. So, for example, in Cape Town, it's great to see your urban mobility budget that's just been launched, prioritising maintenance and public transport, for example. The world that I live in, my biggest client is National Highways in the UK. The work that we are doing shows that if we're going to hit net zero from a transport perspective, you have to do more than electrify your fleet. If you're just relying on electrifying a fleet, you will not make enough fast progress to net zero by 2040. There has to be significant modal shift. There has to be significant focus on promoting more walking and cycling. And if you want to take some great learnings from other international cities, go to Bogota. It didn't feature enormously highly in this index, but Bogota has done some amazing work, starting with Mayor Peñalosa in terms of some of the work and how to make that city a more walking city, a more bike-friendly city, rather than being dominated by the car. And you know what? If you focus on that, then that gives you a better quality of life. It gives you better air quality, as well as improving health and net zero. And my last third point is you get to A+ by being clear about how you are going to do this. So our experience from working from London to Bristol, Stockholm to Edinburgh, Johannesburg to cities across Central Europe and the US is that almost the what is quite easy to do. We all kind of know these are the actions that cities have to take, but getting a strong program, delivering that at scale, having the risk appetite, actually getting contracts let and managing them well, and above all, funding them is really difficult. And so that's why there is so much attention, for example, with some of the cities that I've been involved with in the UK, from Coventry, who are just tendering for a strategic energy partner at the moment, Aberdeen, who've just, and Houston, who have got partnerships with BP as legacy oil cities to be retrofitting, how Bristol has partnered with Amorescu. We have to find practical ways that crowd in private finance as well as public finance to deliver those A+ cities, because if we just rely on the public sector, there just is not the capital available for the public sector to be able to pay for all of this. So, Adria, they're my 3 points. You get to A+ by planning for the future, not just for today. Have a real focus on transport and be absolutely clear about the how, and that includes the funding. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. A lot to chew on there, and I welcome you to jump in as we dive into our panel discussion with Tyrone and Eddie as well. When everyone sees fit, we want this to be sort of an open conversation. And so, Tyrone, I will begin with you. David spoke of planning for the future. This is something San Francisco has been doing for quite a while. Your city has really been at the forefront of climate action long before it was popular, and you have proposed a bold and quite aggressive goal of equitably reaching net zero by 2040 with a 61% reduction by 2030. This is kind of a big question, but what are the 3 big shifts that will need to happen in order for you to achieve that goal? And if you can, dive into some of the challenges along the way as well.
Thank you for the question, and greetings to everyone here. Before I begin, I also want to acknowledge that I join you here from San Francisco as the sun rises, occupying the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who were the original inhabitants of this peninsula area. We've long held our environmental beliefs here in San Francisco on our sleeve and tried to lead in this space. And as Adria mentioned, our goal is to be net zero by 2040 and hit a 61% reduction by 2030. Our latest sectoral emission report shows that we've cut our emissions by 50% already here in the city. So huge accomplishment there, but we have a long way to go. And the easiest way to express where our focus is, we like to do it in 4 words. We say 0, 80, 100, and roots. 0 stands for zero waste as it relates to reuse and recycling, and 0 toxics in the environment. 80% goes to what David was saying. It's 80% sustainable trips by low carbon transport or low carbon modes of transport like biking, walking, or public transit. And the 100 stands for 100% renewable energy. We have to get off fossil fuel. That's a period. There is nothing else to say there other than we need to get ourselves off the fossil fuels throughout this planet. And finally, roots, which speaks to the nature-based solutions that we have to incorporate into our climate plans to enhance biodiversity within our areas and maximize carbon sequestration, which is also part of healing the planet, because it's not going to be enough to just cut emissions anymore. We're going to have to start pulling carbon from the air if we're going to reach our local targets as well as our global targets. Our sectors that are the biggest drivers of at least our scope 2 emissions are building and transportation. It's really no surprise. And it's because of the fossil fuel use. We use natural gas in our buildings here in the city. And so they account for about 45% of our emissions. And for transportation, we obviously run on gasoline and diesel, which then accounts for 44% of our emissions. So all in all, that's 90% of our scope 2 emissions right there. So those are our 2 biggest challenges. And as we look towards more consumption-based modeling, which is the way we should be thinking about our impact on the environment, we're starting to look now at building materials and the complications of what materials are available for constructing our buildings, that we try to meet our affordable housing goals that all of our cities are grappling with, and also making sure that the food that we're generating is being efficiently designed and transported and being redirected to the best and highest use.
We could do a presentation on each one of those. We could have a separate panel on each component of those shifts that need to happen. So I'm mindful of the limits of time and space, but an important component of your plan is the equitability of it, and I wonder about some of the challenges that San Francisco faces. Of course, you're notoriously one of the most expensive cities to live in North America. How do you equitably take on many of those shifts that you've listed while still transitioning to net zero and keeping equity in mind?
That's a great question. And one of the main drivers for inequity and the high costs here in San Francisco and many places is lack of housing and lack of affordable housing, to be clear. And our climate action plan actually has a housing component as part of our climate action plan, recognizing the importance of building enough housing closer to places where people work, building enough affordable housing to keep people here, and also how you build that housing, speaking to what I was discussing earlier. Around equity, we lead with equity in everything that we do. So even in the development of our climate action plan, it took over 2 years. We engaged thousands of San Franciscans. We engaged with our indigenous tribes, all of our communities, on actually building this from the ground up, because there really is no climate action plan unless you have community support and buy-in, and that everyone sees where you're trying to go with your goals. And so we start with equity first. And if you look through all of our actions, equity lies center to accomplishing each of our goals and working with community in partnership. I'll just give one quick example of one way that we're trying to do this on the building decarbonization and electrification side. We're trying to actually do a community-led process by establishing a community equity hub or a climate equity hub. And we want the community to partner with labor, to partner with our indigenous tribes, and also our communities and our nonprofits, actually be the tip of the spear, if you will, on leading the building electrification efforts to tie this work all together, where the city is supporting that hub that we're going to support financially on doing the work that needs to be done throughout the city to make sure that we focus on the areas that most need it, that are underserved, and overburdened by pollution, and then work our way around to building electrification all around the city.
Mm. Often our affordable housing, at least in Toronto, is some of the least efficient and the draftiest in the city. How are you dealing with that in San Francisco?
That's a great question. As part of any development project, it has to go before approval before our policymakers. We include inclusionary housing goals within those projects that get approved. There are very strict requirements also where you can't just build affordable housing and site it somewhere else away from your project. It actually has to be incorporated into your project. So you don't get to build in the wealthiest areas of our city and then push affordable housing somewhere else in the city where it may be less desirable. You have to include affordable housing within those development plans at that site, or have a very, very strong case as to where you might need to locate it. And I can tell you they're not generally very far from where those locations are. So while there may be two buildings that may need to be constructed, they're usually in close proximity. So that's how we try to address the affordable housing, but it's a constant struggle, and even a constant struggle more now with these economic times that we're in globally and here in the US. And so we're revamping kind of even our targets for our affordable housing requirements as we adjust to the market. And I think that's what you have to do, is things aren't static. You have to constantly be moving around and adjusting your goals accordingly.
Like with a lot of cities, San Francisco has been experiencing challenges keeping public transit running post-pandemic. Do you have any advice for how cities can maintain access to the transit we need so badly to lower climate emissions while ridership levels and funding sputters?
Yeah, I mean, we had wonderful ridership levels here in the Bay Area pre-pandemic, and post-pandemic, just, it's behavior change. Once people get accustomed to whatever mode of transport that they use to get to work or to their destination, it takes a while before people are willing to shift back, and that's just human nature. And we see that across any changes we try to make. After the pandemic, we've done a couple things. We actually have made our public transit here in the city free for youth to address some of the equity concerns around the families that can't afford to put their kids on our public transit, and also for the youth themselves. So anyone 18 and below is able to ride public transit for free. We've been making a lot of investments and trying to extend all of our bike lanes, because we have to have safe and protected biking and low carbon transport corridors if we're going to get people to make that shift. So we're kind of using this opportunity to kind of recalibrate and make these critical investments. But at the same time, there's an operational gap, right? If you don't have riders, you create an operational funding gap for your transit agencies, in addition to the long-term capital money that's needed. And so we're having these conversations now with both our state and federal government that has really been focused on vehicle electrification, which is great. Don't get me wrong. But as you can see in San Francisco, we're focused on sustainable trips. So that's why our goal is very clear, that we're about 80% sustainable trips, not 100% electric vehicles, because we're not going to solve our transportation crisis. We just focus on vehicle electrification alone.
Thanks, Tyrone. David, I know you'd like to jump in here. Please do so.
This is such a rich conversation, because the equity side is so important for a thriving city. So San Francisco's a little modest, but I was really interested to see Mayor Breed's Housing for All program just launched as well. And if I compare that to, in the nicest way, Copenhagen and also London, my city, I mean, housing costs are eye-watering here in our cities, and that, from an equity perspective is really, really challenging. You have to build enough homes, and they have to be affordable. I think the other thing, just as we go through a net zero transition and adapt to climate change, the reality is that well-insulated homes are much cheaper to heat in the UK and elsewhere to cool. If you can walk and cycle, that's much cheaper than having to run a car. So there is absolutely an equity piece on this. And then I think just the last one, which I was also really inspired by recently, was also thinking about how public infrastructure can also support equity as well. And I'm really struck that sometimes poorer parts of cities have less access to really good public infrastructure. There's some cities are really taking some leadership on this, and Sydney, for example, is a great example where Sydney Water, as part of its bounce back from the pandemic, has made a commitment that every person in the city will have accessibility to a public bathing site within 15 minutes walk. And I just thought that was really, really interesting, when sometimes we can sometimes focus on great infrastructure in nice middle class areas, but actually there's more need for great public infrastructure in places where maybe your houses are maybe not such great places. Thanks.
David, and that's such a great point. Like, and we have, we joined the Trust for Public Lands goal, every resident to be 10 minutes away from a park. And we were the first city to achieve that goal, because that's also part of creating livability and connecting communities and people moving around. So having these really concrete goals that focus on equity so that everyone gets the benefit of what transition you're trying to achieve is key.
I'd like to bring Eddie in here in Cape Town. Eddie, by the way, congratulations to both, Tyrone and Eddie. Both of your cities were regional leaders. I forgot to mention that right off the top. Sustainability. So Cape Town is South Africa's greenest city on our index. But Eddie, perhaps you can speak to the fact that I know Cape Town's climate change strategy does acknowledge the city's high inequality, and that addressing climate change is as much a political and economic issue as it is a technical one. Can you speak to how Cape Town is working with these factors and how they can all be addressed at once?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's greater equity and inclusivity and a just transition is most certainly at the heart of every single thing we do with regards to our climate change response in order to address those challenges that you've outlined and that's facing not just Cape Town, but South Africa as a whole, relating to high levels of vulnerability and the need for poverty alleviation and of course, socio-economic development. So our climate change response approach, therefore, includes a very strong commitment to do precisely this in a way that creates not just economic opportunities, but also strengthens the health and the well-being of all our citizens. I think that is really an important point to amplify. And our strategy also further acknowledges that working towards that just transition needs to be a core component of what we do here as part of Team Cape Town. And I think just to reference some examples, we know that in South Africa at the moment, we have energy security is a priority. And of course, trying to reduce our reliance of coal-powered energy is a priority for us here in Cape Town. And some of our actions towards that just transition, I think I would just want to quickly reference and those refer to earlier examples, how we see really this could be done and improving our energy security and protecting Cape Town's economy from that negative impact of load shedding through transitioning from our traditional energy supply to modernizing our grid. And of course, the utilization to support renewables and more importantly, green energy. And so our planned continued investment in our innovative green and hybrid infrastructure, such as our new catchment management approaches, will provide much needed green job through our river cleaning programs, as well as other support for the ecosystem our city most certainly relies on. So I think the reduction of our overall climate risk and particularly our drought risk to the city's economy and thereby creating a more resilient economy. I think really that is just some key points that I wanted to highlight. And I know that in terms of just maybe one more example that I want to highlight is our ongoing work to provide, I think we heard the earlier comments about affordable and accessible public transport. We believe that local municipalities should be at the forefront of all things public transport and everything that leads to contributing towards that economic imperative, because we need to grow the economy, we need to create employment opportunities, and I think public transport plays an important part. We've seen that a bulk of our most vulnerable spend more than 40% of the disposable income to get to and from work. And so we understand the importance of providing affordable and accessible public transport to drive down the need for expensive and more carbon intensive private public vehicle use. We heard the earlier remark about what happened during COVID and difficult to transition back to the more preferred modes of transport, but also to support access to job opportunities and efficient municipal services to reduce the impact of vehicle-related air pollution and on our vulnerable groups. So I think in this regard, we are actively advocating for the devolution of passenger rail services to a more competent local authority and investigating the feasibility analyses to guide that devolution. We've seen just here in Cape Town, we look at the commuter percentages. Our passenger rail service has, over the past decade, an annual commuter base of 600 million. As of just about two weeks ago, we received the data. It's gone down from 600 million to an annual now tally of 13 million passengers. So, which is, of course, the situation is quite dire. And I think we've got a mountain to climb to get passengers back on our rail, or fully functional rail. Some of our key rail corridors are not fully functional yet because of vandalism and damaged infrastructure. And we're working hard with our national colleagues to ensure that the infrastructure is fixed and that those who have done so are brought to book, so we can get back up towards the 600 million passenger tally per annum, which I think is where we need to go. We've heard early on why that is so important. So use alternate modes of public transport.
You had mentioned one key kind of foundational element of meeting Cape Town's goals being the transition away from your coal-intensive grid. What is your current pathway to making that transition happen? I imagine it's quite a challenge. We undertook this in Ontario, and it is a process. How is that going for you?
Yeah, no, it is a process, right? I think we believe that you could possibly start with the political will. If you have the political will to fix most of these problems that the country face, we're starting from a very healthy point. Once you have the political will, then you can, of course, conceptualize and co-design a plan to solve that particular problem. Because we hold the view in Cape Town that a well-functioning and sustainable energy system is critical to the health and the well-being of all of Cape Town's residents, but also the functioning of our economy. The economy is contracting at the rate of knots, and we need to ensure that of course is remedied. And we're also seeing our energy now, in our lifetime, we're seeing our energy system changing at a pace and a scale that has never been seen before. And with these changes affecting every single aspect of how energy is generated, distributed, and of course used as well. So in Cape Town, many of our vulnerable households don't necessarily all have access to safe sources of energy, and experience energy power will severely limit their economic participation, but also equally important, their well-being. So recognizing this challenge, we've embarked on a process just last year of developing a new energy strategy, which comes at a critical time to ensure that as Team Cape Town, we can harness those opportunities that we've exposed to now. As you know, every crisis, there are always opportunities. And in changing our energy system in partnership with both the residents and business. So this draft strategy takes away the system-wide perspective on energy, which means not only looking at electricity, for which a city has currently a significant mandate at the present, but also engaging on a broader energy-related matters over time. And so with regards to action on the ground, we are increasing our focus on achieving energy security in response to those natural energy crises, which has led to decisive steps to implement its program of energy diversification through our city's renewable energy efforts to build our own projects, our small-scale embedded generation program, wheeling, and independent power producers program. So significant changes, yes, have also been announced at national level to alleviate those policy blockages and constraints to unlock new generation in the electricity sector. And just about a couple of weeks ago, as the City of Cape Town, we've issued our largest power tender, seeking to buy approximately 500 megawatt of dispatchable energy to the open market. And so this is the final phase of a three-phase procurement process to protect our residents from the first 4 stages of load shedding within the next year. And this includes, of course, contracts for 200 megawatt energy procurement from independent power producers, which will be awarded in 2023. But I think also as residents, we've also got a program called Power Heroes program, rather, which incentivize those we're paying them to voluntarily save electricity via some remote switching of the power incentive devices during peak time. We're also paying businesses cash for power and continuing with our education and awareness aimed at promoting energy efficiency, such as electricity savings campaign, and our energy, water, and waste forum are also contributing. So I think that is important, but I think other than having a plan properly scoped, I think the proof in the pudding is the budget allocation. And over our medium-term revenue and expenditure framework, we've just now announced 2.3 billion rand allocation, which all form part of our measures to ensure energy security in the city of Cape Town.
Eddie, you mentioned conservation being key in there, energy as well as water conservation. We know Cape Town has been severely affected by water scarcity over the last few years. How are you making the city more resilient to way below average levels of rainfall, as well as risk of flood?
I think we spoke about it early on as well, that currently, previously during the drought, we've managed to halve our water usage to about 500 million liters of water per day. We've managed to successfully, mitigate day zero in the city of Cape Town, but we've seen a steady increase of our water usage over the past period, and our dam levels are not where we'd want it to be. And I think also just getting and pulling in the reins ever so slightly again to ensure there's still a resource that we have to use responsibly. So what we've done in terms of our program in the past, and still continuing with that, because we realize that there are strong indications of a hotter and drier future. And as such, our drought readiness programs are a key pillar in the city's climate change response to work and account for the majority of the city's capital spending on climate resilience. So we have our water demand management measures have been in place for the last 2 decades, where we managed to control the water pressure in particular zones. So of course, when there are any leakages, we don't lose as much water as in the past. We've also employed additional staff on the ground so that can respond to those pipe bursts and leak within our reticulation system. We've also now digitized our service request portal, where people can register their service request and click on the links. We also have a dedicated WhatsApp number, where if you don't have access to the link, you can just use the number and WhatsApp your service request, confirm the location. Just helps us being a lot more responsive as a team. But I think ultimately our new water program, which is a recent program, was initiated as a result of all of those planning processes that took place, to conceptualize our Cape Town water strategy. And as I mentioned, this was devised at the height of the drought. And this program includes a number of different interventions. These would include desalination, groundwater use and recharge, water reuse, and invasive species management. Just as an example of the latter, since the program was initiated, the clearing of our invasive species has resulted in approximately a savings of 11.4 billion liters of water per year, or about 31 megaliters per day, being made available for use. And so the large-scale removal of our alien invasive species ensures higher groundwater recharge levels within the city, our strategic aquifers, and enhances water catchment in the city service water supply catchment areas. And so the removal also serves to reduce fire risk, when as we face a more hotter and drier future.
Canadians have a lot to learn from you. Obviously, we are the biggest water hogs, I think, on the planet. So it's pretty shameful how much water we waste as individuals and collectively as society. And speaking of learning from each other, before we open it up to audience questions, and I would invite those in the audience to please put your questions in the chat for our panelists. I'd like to put this question to everyone on the panel. Tyrone, starting with you. We've been talking a lot about individual actions that cities are undertaking. Can you speak to the need for and some examples of, maybe one example of ways that your city has collaborated with others to tackle climate action, so that we're not just working in a silo alone?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think even just having this conversation in the public is part of that, and even learning from Eddie and what they're doing in Cape Town. It's helpful, right? Because it's about knowledge sharing, and these public indexes and reports that Corporate Knights have produced are actually part of that conversation that we're trying to generate within the public and within our policymakers. So, we're part of a number of networks, and that's one of our primary ways of sharing information with other cities. We're with Cape Town and C40 Cities, which is a global community of cities that are working on climate initiatives. We have the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. We have our own West Coast thing of the Pacific Coast Collaborative, which includes the province of British Columbia and all the states on the West Coast. And all of it's about harmonizing our goals and policies. So a lot of our policies and goals within our climate action plans are mirrored with other goals that cities have adopted around the world, because we know by pulling together all of our efforts, we can scale the impact of our actions. I'll just quickly highlight one quick one that we did with the Pacific Coast Collaborative around food waste. Bringing the grocers and the large grocery chains that we have in the US to the table was always difficult for us in San Francisco. By working with kind of the state leads, as well as the major city leads along the West Coast, we were able to kind of bring them to the table so that we could start tackling kind of all the supply chain concerns and issues, and making sure that we were being most efficient on kind of how we were distributing food, and have developed actually a really robust partnership with those cities and those grocers now on a much larger scale we would have been able to accomplish alone in San Francisco, to where all the grocers are on board on correct inventorying and management of their supply chain, ensuring that food, before they just toss it in the compost, which is great, but that they're redirecting that food first and foremost to its highest and best use, which is in the mouths of people that need it. And so we have this wonderful synergy and partnership, and that's just one example.
That's fantastic, especially knowing how much water and energy is embedded in all the food we consume.
That's right.
Great. Eddie, can you share any examples of how cities in general, how your city has collaborated with others on climate action?
Yeah, I think the important point that Tyrone makes as well is that we should collaborate. We have a shared future, and as responsible and affected stakeholders, we need to contribute in a sustainable manner. And so that's what we believe here in Cape Town as well, that this collaboration helps us with our climate action response. Far too long, it's been ignored, but it needs to start at home. And so once you have your position, you can then, of course, engage with other municipalities and see how best we can learn from each other. We should not prescribe, but I think those lessons learned are invaluable. And just some example that I think for Team Cape Town as well, in terms of our climate action plan, which was approved last year, is a product of the collaboration with C40 cities as well, is our commitment to the C40 2020 deadline program, which included, of course, 11 cities across the African continent to work towards that same goal. And so the city's net zero carbon buildings program was also initiated through its participation in C40, South African Builders Program. And both of these programs facilitated the learning and peer-to-peer sharing with global and local C40 city members, which are very excited to be part of. Another example that I could reference would be our partnership with ICLEI, the Local Governments for Sustainability. The city, we also have, and we will continue to engage and exchange with other member cities. And these partnerships often are the result in direct support to the city, as well as our current partnerships with ICLEI, where we've received donation of mature trees to our city's Recreation and Parks Department, which of course has been well received. And so the longer term the long-term intent of the program being able to reduce the heat island effect and provide shading in those two identified areas as well, where, as you know, some parts of our city where during apartheid people were forcibly removed, and the necessary infrastructure and recreational amenities are not as evident as in other parts of the city. So the planting of these trees would now offer much needed natural resources in those communities. And I think also one more point to make mention of would be that we also utilize existing and continue exploring new city partnership, focusing on sustainability and climate change. And an example of this includes our partnership with Malmo and Munich respectively. And so this partnership program typically includes international exchanges between each pair of municipalities, and one in Africa and one in Europe, around a joint program of action. And I think that's the point that I want to amplify here today, the importance of working together towards that shared future, because we have a moment in time, but sadly, we don't have time.
Thanks, Eddie. David, we have a question from an audience member here. Would you be able to speak a bit more to the point around neurodiversity and your focus on neurodiversity in future transportation planning? We are a little tight on time, so I will ask you to keep your comments brief moving forward.
Yeah, I'll keep it very brief. I mean, first of all, if you don't mind me just to build out on what can cities do to share. I mean, I think, this is where the private sector has a big role as well. We're sharing the experience on net zero transport that we've learned from the UK with Melbourne, Sydney, Perth. Auckland, we're sharing the lessons that they can learn from New York after Hurricane Sandy and building back better from there. So there's a big role for the private sector there. Neurodiversity, our Future Ready analysis is showing that one in 5 people in the UK is neurodiverse. That's not a disability, that's just reality, from autism to dyslexia, geriatric needs and the like. We've been doing some specific work specifically on what to different to people with different needs. What do they find easy? What do they find hard? And then integrating that. So that can be just from providing choice in terms of route finding. It can be just better route finding. It can be places to sit down because sometimes you make slower progress. So just some very, very simple tools. And we've got a white paper that's due to publish shortly that will give more information on that as well.
Thanks very much. And Tyrone, we have a question from Fiona. How is affordable housing defined? Is it based on income or on what is happening in the housing market?
Great question. It's based on income. And so we use the area median income to decide kind of what those income brackets are to qualify for the affordable housing. The amount of affordable housing that has to be built for a particular development gets set by our policymakers. And so they determine the percentage of units in a particular development that must be dedicated for affordable housing. And then from there, there will be a certain number in proportion to low income in the low income bracket. Might be some in the middle income bracket, and some that might even be targeted for specific groups. Like we have a new housing project in one area of our city focused for housing for public teachers who are being priced out of the city. And so we're building housing for them to help keep them closer to work.
Thank you. And from Yvonne, for all our panelists, do nature-based solutions help mitigate drought problems?
Well, I'll jump in on that. I mean, nature-based solutions have a tremendous opportunity, not just for mitigating drought, because you then have slower runoff from cities, and it's not just going straight off hard surfaces, but they also have a huge role to play in terms of making our cities livable, more pleasant, able to adapt to higher temperatures that we're going to expect with urban heat islands. So yeah, get the greenery, and the more green, the better.
Eddie, what's your approach to this?
Yeah, Audrey, I agree with David. I think we need to see a biodiversity as an asset. I spoke earlier about our Green Jobs program, so not just an economic opportunity, but now the water savings relies and which we can use now. So I think, and that is really important. Government should have a nature-based solution response. I think that is really, really important because of the benefits, and also not just from economic benefits in terms of employment, but also just from a nature-based solution perspective. If we look at in Cape Town, what has happened in the city of Durban just last year, where there was severe flooding happened there, a massive infrastructure collapse, and we argue if there was a nature-based solution that they thought of prior, it would have prevented all of that, and even a proper tree replacement program as well in that city. So fully support nature-based solutions. I think we need more of that going forward in everything government does.
And I just might add just one quick thing. I agree with what Eddie and David were saying around stormwater management, recharging aquifers, livability. It's all included in there. One thing in terms of drought mitigation is making sure you're planting the native species to the area, because a lot of times if you don't focus on the right species, you're putting more water intensive species in areas that aren't suited for it. And California is a very arid state by nature and naturally. And we've planted all these trees that are not native to the area that require a lot more water because they're not used to this really dry environment.
Mm. And just quickly, a question about circularity. What are your cities doing to tackle, in 30 seconds or less, to become more circular? Tyrone, do you want to jump into that?
Sure. We're focused a lot on the building use. Actually, I was just part of a moderating panel yesterday. I think part of how we're going to address our circularity issues is about what we choose to purchase, but also we're going to need some innovation in the space, in all honesty. And I was just meeting and moderating a panel with some of our foremost climate tech companies that we have here in the Bay Area, talking about how are they sequestering carbon, putting that back into concrete or limestone or aggregate that could be reused for building materials. Carbon sequestration and capture going into fashion. Like, these are all the things that are going to help with that circularity. And then obviously it's the choices we make on the front end as we continue to look upstream. We can't just look downstream as, are we sorting properly? It's what choices are we making so we don't have to get to that sorting at the end.
David.
I'll just jump in very, very quickly. I mean, two thoughts. I mean, the most obvious one that city authorities can do is increase recycling rates. I mean, okay, you can reduce the total amount of waste produced, but again, the UK, our recycling rates have been about 41% and pretty static. There's much more that we should do on that. That's 60% of the waste that 9 million Londoners throw away every day is not recycled. That's not acceptable in a circular economy. I think the other thing from a planning perspective is there is a very, very fast move away in to focus on building refurbishment rather than demolishing at will, and then getting the star architect in to design something amazing. We'll see very, very fast progress in a circular economy world to reusing what we've got in building refurbishment.
Eddie, I will give you the last word.
Yes, sorry about that. Absolutely agree what David is saying there. We also, as Team Cape Town, we're trying to look at our planning legislation to encourage green alternatives when building. We've just had the world's tallest building built from hemp that has been approved and now done, and actually have a site visit planned there. But I think with regards to our dumping hotspots, so we've got now again employment opportunities where we have gone into informal settlements where the primary needs are basically food and shelter, and not focusing on recycling, going in there with education awareness programs, also highlighting the importance of disposing of both liquid and solid waste in a sustainable manner, not just for economic opportunities, but also the preservation of our environment. So just two examples of what's happening, and it really excites us here in Cape Town.
I wish we had another hour with all of you. I'm glad we got a chance to dive into as much as we did today, but thank you all so much for your time and insight, and wishing you all luck on your sustainability journey. And an extra special thank you to WSP for making this year's index possible, and to our researchers, Nadia and Ralph Torrey, who did all the heavy lifting to get us this report today. You can find our report on our website today, as well as articles on the index itself, as well as some leading circular cities. Go to corporatenights.com for all the information. Thanks again, everyone. Have a fabulous day.